Hi, I'm Aidan Feldman, and this is a talk for Keith Thompson's class, Making, Living, Thriving Through the Arts at ASU. My arts life is as a dancer, but hopefully this will be more broadly applicable to people in other fields. I don't have any slides or anything, and I've included all the links and whatnot below, so feel free to listen while you're doing dishes or whatever. So, things I'm going to talk about today. First, I will talk about my background and what the different sides of my work life look like. I'm going to spend more time talking about myself than I normally like to, but hopefully it helps kind of set the stage for how I've structured my work life between being an artist and beyond. I will then transition into talking about finding balance in your work life, again, arts and beyond, and then some questions for you to consider in doing so. So starting off, I'm 37, I am based in New York City, and I currently identify myself as a dancer, technologist, I'll explain what that means, and a teacher. So I dance with 3 companies at present, Dance Tactics, which Keith is the director of, as well as Artichoke Dance and Dance Entropy, both of which are based in New York City. So I also freelance with government and nonprofit teams, doing technology, essentially helping improve how these systems work. Lastly, I teach code and data skills, specifically within like public policy programs at Columbia and NYU. So a bit of my background, I started in musical theater in elementary school, so that turned into dance and a little bit later. I was always into nerdy stuff like math and physics, but wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with it. So I looked at colleges where I could double major in dance and engineering. And at that time, which was the early 2000s, not that many schools were good at both and willing to let you do both as a double major. So my impression is that that's thankfully changed. More and more students are doing it. So hopefully that isn't the experience for other people that are seeking that path. So did that double major, ended up doing 5 years just because it was so many credits, and I happened to pick 2 fields that did not have a lot of overlapping classes. So doesn't mean that all double majors will take 5 years, but that's what I did, and I have no regrets. I've been dancing and doing tech work for the 14 years since college, so keeping both going in parallel. On the tech side, I started out doing web development, so building apps essentially. I got fired from what I thought was my dream job back in 2014, and through a coworker found my way into government work. That field is sort of called civic tech, so doing technology like in and for government and basically making like society work better. And I call myself a technologist because while I do write code, I'm a programmer. I also do a lot of like documentation and process improvement, so it ends up being broader. On the teaching side, when I moved to New York City coming out of college, I met a lot of people that were teaching themselves to code, which just didn't occur to me was a path that you can take. So I started a meetup for office hours to kind of help people through that process, as well as leading workshops. That spilled into teaching at universities as an adjunct. And while I enjoy teaching dance, most of my teaching has been on the like tech and government side. So when I refer to teaching, it's sort of adjacent to or subset of the tech life. All right, so before I continue, I have a few acknowledgments of my privileges. So I have very supportive parents. They were very into me doing both, of these things that I wanted to be doing, dance and technology. To be honest, they were both artists, and so maybe different than a lot of stereotypes. They were like, "Are you sure you want to be an engineer? Like that sounds hard. Why would you do that?" So anyway, they provided that safety net and emotional support, so I was very lucky there. I happen to be capable at and enjoy working in technology. And I'm lucky that that is a field that is particularly lucrative and flexible. And I got in at a time when the job market was particularly hot. That's changed a bit, which is a whole other talk, but anyway, that was a very lucky thing for me. I've never been in dire financial straits, mostly because of having this balance of these different fields that I was working in. I've stayed fairly healthy, so I haven't had loss of income due to injury in a major way or anything like that. And I also don't have any dependents. I don't have any kids, and so that keeps my expenses down. So, all of that said, it is almost impossible to be a performer or a choreographer full-time in the United States. It's just an unfortunate reality. Even if you could pull it off somehow, the pay sucks. It just does not make a living. It's basically impossible to make a living doing exclusively that. So there's some exceptions, like for dancers, working on a cruise ship, for example, but that's a big lifestyle commitment. You're living out of a suitcase on a boat, and so that's not really going to work for everybody. I have friends who have, made it, and again, I'm speaking to the dance field here specifically, but I know you all might have different backgrounds. The friends that have made it and are in big name modern dance companies, a lot only work part of the year. So that dance company maybe only has rehearsal periods and tours and stuff like that for maybe 9 months a year. And then the company lays them off so that the dancers can collect unemployment. It's a really kind of sad reality of how it works. But that means they need jobs that other time, if they could even make a living off of the dance company itself, which is a big if. So being a performer choreographer, in Europe, it I think pays better. There's more funding and that kind of thing. In the U.S., back in the day, before the 21st century, I think the funding was very different, but it's just not the reality now. So this is somewhat specific to dance, especially modern dance, but from what I can tell, it's true to some extent in other art disciplines to some degree. So, point there is that you have to figure out an additional thing to do to make money. You cannot just be a performer or choreographer or whatever the equivalent is. So a lot of performers, stereotypically waiting tables was a common job, but a lot of my dancer friends these days that didn't have a sort of other field like I did, I'm seeing them go into things that might be dance adjacent, so things like teaching dance or arts administration, right? So they're still staying in that world, even if they're not dancing 24 hours a day or 8 hours a day. Some also do something with maybe a more flexible schedule. So that might be, physical, being a physical trainer, doing massage therapy, tutoring, catering, right? With something like catering, they can pick up shift work. So if they have a show, they can just miss that shift, and that's fine. So there are equivalents for artists in other disciplines, like teaching being a common one, right? If you're a painter, you can teach painting classes to adults or kids, something like that. But I do want to emphasize that teaching is a different job than making art. I happen to like teaching, but it's okay if you don't. Just know that, they are different, complementary, but different skill sets. And, so it's worth acknowledging that it's not the same, and you might not find it as satisfying. You might not find it enjoyable. That's okay. You can do something different. So there are jobs that do allow you to do both. So being a professor is a really common one, where you both have time as a dance professor, for example, where you are teaching classes and teaching people dance, right? You're not dancing yourself so much. But then you're also potentially doing your own performances or setting work on students. And so you do have, kind of that split time, and it allows you to, have a stable job within the dance world. So if you're going to have another job, it might as well be something you find interesting. That's, if you take nothing else from this talk, I want that to be it. So I'll say it again. If you're going to have another job, it might as well be something you find interesting. to feel like you're getting something out of that time as opposed to just money. So some people may talk about finding, these other jobs like as a backup plan or just, because they have to. A backup plan isn't a terrible idea. So dance in particular is a really fragile existence, right? You're depending on your body, and a bad injury or some sort of chronic pain that comes up or something like that can put you out of it for extended periods or potentially even for good. If that happened and you were exclusively a dancer, you didn't have anything else that you had kind of going professionally, you'd have a really tough time, right? You'd sort of lose that main source of income, that main focus of your time, and it would be really unpleasant. So I don't wish that on anybody, of course, but it is a possibility. So the more positive spin is thinking about having like parallel or complementary careers, right? It's not just I'm a dancer and oh yeah, I have this other job on the side just because I have to, right? Like I introduced myself at the beginning, I'm a dancer and a technologist and a teacher, right? It's a multifaceted identity. But it doesn't have to be your identity. It is okay to just have a job that makes money. But I encourage you to find something that is of interest. So for me, having that mix, right, where dance, like it's so physical, you practice, where you get to a place where you don't have to think, right? It's very much like a flow state. Coding, on the other hand, is a lot of problem solving and cognitive function, and it is also, a kind of thing where you can get to a flow state. That's also probably its own talk. But, it's very different. Sitting, staring at a screen, thinking really hard, and that kind of thing, it's very different than being in rehearsal. So teaching, you're doing a lot of design and preparation before the classes, right? That's maybe more like being a choreographer. And then once you're in there, you really have to think on your feet. So each of these different fields, each of these different jobs, careers I have, are pretty different. And I like that. They provide really good balance for one another, right? You're not like just staring at a computer screen 8 hours a day. You're not just in rehearsal. You're not just doing one thing. That variety is sometimes really positive. So another positive, I think, is that it gives perspective, right? You're more than your art. I'm not just a dancer, and if I couldn't dance anymore for some reason, then I have no identity, right? That's like a part of my existence, and I think people who are multifaceted are more interesting, personally. So I'm not saying you need to go into tech specifically. I think it's worth considering, but having a job that is potentially lucrative, we'll talk about the other things you might prioritize later. Finding that other job that is interesting to you and you get a lot out of is worth considering. So that takes us to money. As I mentioned, I've never been a starving artist, so I can't speak from experience. I, of course, have had a lot of friends that are doing that, and it doesn't seem that fun, to be honest. Fortunately or unfortunately, there is a positive correlation between money and happiness for most people. It's a little more complicated than that. I have a link below, but in the arts, it does make your life a lot easier. So, for example, you can reduce the factor of money in your decision making, right? If you have a choice between two gigs, you don't have to choose the one that pays more. You can do the one that you think is going to advance you more, that you're going to get more out of, or that's more interesting, right? It allows you to factor in other things more heavily. So also, like, if I want to do my own project, so for example, last year I produced my own show and showed my own choreography as part of that. I could rent rehearsal space and pay dancers out of pocket. I had money to do that, and felt really good that I could pay them what I thought was fair, what was fairly comparable to other dance companies, and that's something I could just do. I didn't have to go through the whole rigmarole of applying for grants and that kind of thing. I didn't want to spend time on that. I could just pay and just eat that cost myself, And I was okay with that because that's what I make the money for. So I think there's a stigma with like selling out, right? That term of, if you're just doing something for money, um, that's really looked down upon. And I think it's worth teasing it apart a little bit, um, acknowledging that making money doesn't necessarily require compromising your principles, right? You can find a job that maybe isn't like your first choice of what you do with your time, but it is providing these other benefits, money being one of them. We'll talk more about other benefits in a bit. So in terms of structure, for 11 years out of school, I was working a day job in technology, like 40-ish hours a week, and then doing dance and teaching on the side. I am a little bit of a workaholic, or a lot of it really. I tend to make all my hobbies my jobs, so I do have 6 of them presently, but all are part-time. And there are actually some big benefits of having a bunch of part-time jobs that, relative to having that one day job, that one sort of full-time thing that I hadn't really expected going into it. Rarely am I doing one thing for 8 hours straight, right? Because I'm hopping between all these different jobs. I'm doing, 2, 3 in a day, potentially more. That variety is really a good thing for me. I think that context switching isn't going to work for everybody, but it's something I actually like, and it keeps me from getting bored. It also spreads out the risk. So I mentioned earlier about getting injured, right? If you only have a dance gig and you can't do that all of a sudden, you're maybe in big trouble. Whereas if you have a bunch of jobs, right? If you get injured and can't do one dance job, there's other things that you can sort of make up the time with. In a corporate or nonprofit kind of environment, you do have to worry about layoffs, right? Money is, you're sort of at their whims when it comes to money. If they don't have money to pay you, right, they could lay you off. I've seen this happen to a lot of friends in tech actually, which again, they only had one job, and when they lose that job, they all of a sudden have 0. Whereas having a bunch can actually, reduce that risk of losing any single one of them. And then lastly, if you don't like one job, you can leave, right? So in my case, I have 6. If I don't like one of them, I still have 5. It's not like I don't have any income at that point. So that gives me a lot of comfort in knowing, no, I can be choosy about how I spend my time, and if something stops working for me, I can walk away from it without having a lot of turmoil around losing the money, especially. So tying your paycheck and thus your livelihood to something does add a lot of pressure. So I mentioned that I tend to make all of my hobbies my jobs, right? I have these kind of 3 parallel careers. Being an artist professionally can be really brutal. And honestly, there's no shame in making your living outside of the arts and then doing your art in your free time on your own terms. It gives a lot of flexibility. Again, having that income from a full-time job then really frees you up in what you can do. You can pay for classes, you can buy supplies, you can rent space, whatever you need to do. That you don't have all that pressure of, oh, this has to work because this is the only way I'm making money right now. So something to consider. All right, that brings us into getting jobs. So first off, I encourage you to be intentional in the choices you make around your careers. So anything you do, any job you take, they're going to come with trade-offs. That doesn't mean everything's a sacrifice, but you just have to weigh, what you're getting and losing. So, for example, maximizing the amount of time that you're doing your art, say as a dancer, as a painter, or whatever, will probably mean you're making less money. Another example, doing a full-time job means you can't rehearse during the day, but you'll have money and potentially things like health insurance, right? And that frees you up in other ways. Next, networking. So I don't think I've gotten a job from a resume or a cattle call audition in over a decade. Everything has been through my network, and I think that's pretty true for a lot of other people who aren't just coming out of school. A lot of this is luck, but you do have to make opportunities to get lucky, right? It's not, oh, this person that I really want to work with, that's necessarily going to happen, but in attending events and making connections with people, someone is going to be like, oh, wait, that's really cool that you do that. I actually have a friend that has a need for that. Would you mind if I connect you? Right? That's kind of how it happens in my experience. So you need to build and maintain your network. Maintaining, first I should say building, right, means you gotta be good at small talk. You gotta be comfortable with talking to people that you don't know and finding out what they do and if there's any connection to your interests and such. Maintaining means keeping relationships with people who you think might be helpful to you, right? That you want to work with, work for, or that you think might have good advice, be mentors and that kind of thing. So you might think ahead to, okay, if you got a job, either in your current industry or in a different one, who would you ask to be a reference? So whoever that person is, professor, whatever, former boss, something like that, keep in touch with them. So don't just reach out cold after years and ask for a reference because they're going to say, sorry, I don't really know what you're up to. I can't speak to it. If they're an artist, go to their shows, for example, and pass opportunities to them, right? If you see something come through on a mailing list or whatever, pass along things to them that you think might be relevant because what goes around comes around. They're going to appreciate that you thought of them and they'll do the same for you. So working with, working on building that network, not only does it become easier to get jobs, but those jobs are going to be safer bets, right? If you get introduced to a company through someone someone who can speak on your behalf, someone who knows that company, first of all, they can give you the inside scoop so you kind of know what you're getting into because, you don't want to get to a job and find out that actually this is a terrible experience. And you're working with someone that you already have a relationship with as opposed to complete strangers. So that also makes it safer for you. Not to mention that they can put in a good word on your behalf. So this applies to jobs inside and outside of the arts, right? This has been the case for me for dance companies. I've had much better experience when I know someone than when I don't. So lastly, in getting jobs or related to getting jobs, don't be a diva. You want to promote yourself, but you don't want to brag really blatantly. Similarly, when you're in a project, when you're doing performances and that kind of thing, don't be a diva because the other people that are around are going to not want to work with you and therefore not going to suggest your name when they see other opportunities arise. No one wants to work with assholes. So there's someone who's just as talented, who's nicer than you out there somewhere. So you want people who are hiring or who are creating opportunities to think of you and think of you as the nice one as opposed to someone else. Okay. Coming to brainstorming. So how do you think about your career steps? How do you think what this sort of balance could be in terms of arts and additional work? So a couple things that have been helpful for me are a personal board of directors and a blog post around my work. So I'll speak to each of those independently. The personal board of directors is an idea that someone else recommended to me. When I was switching jobs a few years ago, I came across this idea. Someone told me about it and it sounded really great. And the idea is essentially that you get together a group of friends, colleagues, and mentors to get advice, and those people can kind of hear what's on your mind and provide feedback on, hey, you should maybe explore this thing, or actually it sounds like that's a dead end, or it sounds like you're really unhappy with this thing that maybe you weren't even thinking about before. You might want to reconsider how to do that. So I did this. I found people that I'd worked with or that I just knew personally, and got them together. I had sent a long message, after they agreed to be part of it. I sent a long message kind of explaining what was on my mind, and then we met and talked through it. We had some follow-up messages and calls after check-in, but I think it was just that, kind of one main meeting. And even that short intervention was super valuable. People were happy to do it, and I got a lot out of it. I'm including a link to more about like the personal board of directors idea below. So secondly, in terms of kind of brainstorming, getting your information about yourself out there, when I was switching from engineering full-time, like having a day job, to freelancing, I wanted a link I could send to people, instead of having to like type it out each time, to be able to quickly like explain what I was like offering and looking for and that kind of thing. I thought about doing like a website that was professional as a me as a business and that kind of thing, but that felt a bit too formal. It didn't feel like a good fit for where I was at. And so I ended up doing a blog post. Explained my background, what I'm good at, what I was looking for. It's kind of like a cover letter that you do for certain kinds of jobs, but this was more general, right? It wasn't specific to a certain job, but just a broadly applicable. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm looking for. So, regardless of whether you're trying to freelance or not, even if you're not going to send it to anyone, I found thinking through what I'm good at in particular to be super helpful, right? Like within your discipline, what sets you apart from other people, like in dance and technology and whatever, right? As a dancer, for example, like, are you acrobatic? Like, can you do tricks or that kind of thing? So it can be skills-based things. It can also be kind of interpersonal, or more like soft skills of, are you easy to work with? Are you organized? Are you, really good at like collaboration and helping people develop their ideas or whatever. The link to my post is below. It is tech focused, but hopefully translatable. You can imagine what it would look like for someone in the arts, and that could be a useful thing to do. Again, even if you don't send it to anybody, just forcing yourself to write out, here are the things that I'm really good at. So that brings us to the questions. So in order to kind of generate some ideas, not to necessarily get an answer, but just to get things started, let's start with that last one of, what are you good at? What does set you apart from other people in your discipline? Second, if you had all the money, skills, help, etc. that you wanted, what would you be doing with your time? Like, what's your dream, essentially, if you could just snap your fingers and have it professionally? Next question, what are your priorities in your work life, particularly outside of the arts? So this might be, flexibility of time, like being able to work on your own schedule so you can do auditions and rehearsals and things like that. It could be flexibility of location, right? Do you want to work remotely so you can travel and tour and not, have to be at a certain place, every single day or that kind of thing? Do you prioritize money so that you can finance your own projects and pay off debt and afford a nicer place and things like that? Are you going to prioritize good health care, right? Do you potentially have chronic health issues, right? Or do you have kids that, need insurance and that kind of thing, right? That might be something that is higher for some people than others. Is it number of hours, right? Do you want a lot of work-life balance? Do you want a lot of free time? Do you need time to like take care of kids or older parents or something like that? And then lastly, like how important is it to you to like work in a very specific job, a very specific field, right? Like I want to do exactly this versus, how open are you to, being a little more open with what you're working on. So all of these things that you're prioritizing, right? And I would actually rank them. These are going to change, right? And the weight and the order of them is going to change. So it's fine to just answer for now and evaluate later. Right? Think about actually now it is really important that I'm getting healthcare because like more medical issues are coming up or something like that, right? So you can then pivot as you need. Next question: if you couldn't do your art anymore for whatever reason, right? That discipline didn't exist. What would you do instead? And lastly, what's a professional curiosity you haven't explored? So what's a job you've heard about where you were like, wow, that's really cool, but maybe you didn't know that much about it. Like someone introduced themselves as a such and such, and you had just met them at a party, and you didn't really know what that was, but it seemed like something that was interesting. What are things like that where it's maybe worth like exploring a little bit more? Like what actually is that job, right? Maybe you could reach out to them and find out. So I hope you take the time to answer those questions. I wrote them all out below, and I hope that's helpful in helping you think through how to balance your work life between your arts and whatever else you find that you end up doing. So thank you so much for taking the time. Again, I'm Aiden Feldman, and thank you for listening.